River. It's about 7 miles from my house. And the Patriot forces, they were down at Hollingsworth Mill, which is over that way. They sent a flying column of 1,300 men to surround Cunningham. Patrick Cunningham escaped. He had 200 men with him. 130 were captured. 70 got away. He was one of them that got away. But his brother, Robert Cunningham, was the most ardent loyalist in the back country. Robert Cunningham was a very influential man here. He got elected as state senator from, this was the Little River District at that time. During the middle of the war, 1778, from Little River District, Lawrence County, they elect a Tory to be their state senator. Patrick Cunningham was elected to be a state representative. They were very well respected, and that shows how divided Lawrence County was during that time. That was a true civil war. And these men knew each other. That's what I'm saying. Colonel Hayes lives here. That's a very distinguished plantation. That's a gem for Lawrence County. But William Cunningham, Bloody Bill Cunningham, started out as a patriot. He joined the Patriot forces against his cousin, Patrick Cunningham, who's in the canebrake. And William Cunningham is part of that force of 1,300 men that surround his cousin, and his cousin gets away. So he's a patriot. What he says was, he signs up as a patriot as long as he could stay within 50 miles of his house, of his home. And that's what the militiamen wanted. They didn't want to go far out. They wanted to protect their home. Forget what's happening 100 miles away. I want to be safe right here in my area. Well, William Cunningham's command was transferred to Charleston. He didn't like that. And he starts being insubordinate. And his commanding officer says, well, I'm not going to have any of this. And so he tied him to a post and publicly whipped him with 50 lashes.
Ooh.
So Bloody Bill Cunningham, right after that happened, he deserts. He goes to East Florida, and then when the British take Savannah in 1778, he goes to Savannah. So when he's in Savannah, he gets news, some bad news about his family up here. And what had happened was this patriot, he was a captain, Captain William Ritchie, but he was a plundering captain. He was a plundering patriot. You know, there were plunderers on both sides. There were bad guys on both sides. William Ritchie was a bad guy who was on the patriot side. So he goes to William Cunningham's father's plantation, farm, whatever it was, and he, you know, abuses the father terribly to find out where Bloody Bill was or whatever. Bloody Bill's brother was an invalid. I think he had bad epilepsy or something like that. So he was at home. Well, Bloody Bill William Ritchie abuses the brother so bad that the brother dies. Mm. He abuses the father, and he abuses the brother so bad that the father dies. So William Cunningham got that information when he was in Savannah. He walked 180 miles from Savannah in 6 days to the home of William Ritchie. And he pulls Ritchie out by the scruff of his neck and throws him down in the front yard and shoots him dead in front of his family.
Ooh.
So that's just warming up for Cunningham. So, you know, the war continues. The British are forced into Charleston. You know, the British lose, you know, Kings Mountain, Cowpens, Utah Springs, Season 96, all of that. They're losing. So they're just in an enclave in Charleston. And they were in Charleston for the last 18 years of the war, 18 months of the war, before they finally sailed away. And there wasn't a lot going on. There wasn't a lot of fighting in between those forces. You know, the British weren't hardly making forays. They were being supplied by sea. They weren't going anywhere. They were surrounded. 18 months of that. Upstate Loyalists were living as refugees in Charleston at that time. Well, Cornwallis, you know, does his thing, finally winds up at Yorktown, and he's bottled in by the French fleet, and Cornwallis surrenders. That was on October the 18th, 1781. So everybody's, you know, thinking that the war is over, you know, celebrating and all that sort of thing. And Joseph Hayes, with a solid core of his Little River Regiment, about 35 men, according to one record that I read. See, I hear a lot of conflicting information about what happened and how and so forth. And when I have that, I give both sides of the story, you know, and y'all decide which one you like the best, and that's the one you can go with. But, and that's what I do. But anyway, you know, one account says that Colonel Hayes and 35 men are eating dinner, lunch, or whatever at his plantation house. Now, at this time, I'm going to switch gears because that's the Bloody Bill part of this story. I want to talk about the men of the Little River District now, present-day Lawrence County. The men that fought with the Little River Regiment. And the Little River Regiment is made up of patriot militiamen, farmers, who sign up for 30 days or whatever, do their little fight and come back and plant their crops. They have one of the most distinguished records of any regiment in the entire Revolutionary War. Anybody who is a descendant of the Little River Regiment should really feel proud, because these guys did well. I will point out that there was another Lawrence County fighting man who was the fightingest guy in the entire war. And his name was David Fanning, and he was a loyalist. But Lawrence County produced a lot of very successful and active military men. I'm not going to go, I mean, the engagements of the Little River Regiment, 49 different engagements. You know, the Snow Campaign, the Cherokee War of 1776, the first siege of 96, and the second siege of 96, Augusta. All of these battles they fought in, they were victorious. They fought under Andrew Pickens. They were instrumental in what happened when the tide turned at Musgrove Mill. So the entire war in South Carolina changed when the British took Charleston in May 12, 1780. It was a sea change. Andrew Williamson, who was the General Andrew Williamson, defected to the British. He was called the South Benedict Arnold, even though he may have been a spy. But anyway, that's what Nathaniel Greene said. But Andrew Pickens, my hero, he surrendered to the British. He said, if you protect me, I will go under your protection. If you protect me, I will sit in my house the rest of the war, and I won't take up arms against you. Robert Anderson, namesake of Anderson City and County, second under Pickens, he surrendered. The only officer, or the leading officer of the Little River Regiment who did not surrender was James Williams. And there's several Williams family members here. James Williams had a plantation 2 miles away, right over there. he had a fort there, Fort Williams, and there was some fighting and so forth going on, and the fort got burned down. But James Williams was the most ardent patriot in the in Lawrence County. I told you Robert Cunningham was the most ardent loyalist. James Williams was the most ardent patriot, and he was not going to surrender to the loyalist forces or the British forces who were in charge. He wasn't going to do that. So he had a band of about 60 men. Isaac Shelby at this time comes over the mountains from Tennessee with his Over Mountain Boys. Isaac Shelby was in South Carolina twice. His first foray, he comes in, he captures Fort Thickety. I'm doing some work there. He has some fights in Spartanburg County. They were fighting over peach orchards and stuff like that. He was in Spartan County. Elijah Clark came up from Georgia with 60 men. Shelby, Williams, Clark. They joined together up at Grendel Shoals, I believe it is, in Spartanburg County. And they got word that there was a 200-man militia contingent at Musgrove Mills in Lawrence County, where Lawrence County joined Spartanburg and Union County on the Enoree River. That was a loyalist outpost. So Shelby and the other group, they're like, hey man, 200, we got 200, let's go get them. They rode all night long, 40 miles to Musgrove Mill. What they did not know, and what they found out shortly after they arrived in place, was that a British force of militia, 400 strong, was coming through on the way to 96, and they decided to stop at Musgrove Mill that night. So the next morning, these 200 men with the Little River Regiment and James Williams, they get to Musgrove Mill, and they all of a sudden they're faced with 600 people. Well, they rode all night long. Their horses were wore out. They were like, what do we do now? And they came up with a plan just, immediately. What they did was they were at the top of an old Indian agricultural field, had a lane down the middle, and they quickly created a breastworks 300 yards long out of fallen trees and brush and saplings and stuff like that. They were hiding behind trees with their rifles. Shadrach Inman, I told you Andrew Pickens is a hero of mine. Shadrach Inman is definitely a hero of mine. He was with Clark's group in Georgia, with Elijah Clark. He came up with a plan that he would charge the loyalist forces. So he charged right to the loyalists with about 15 or 20 men, and they were hooping and hollering and shouting and shooting. And as soon as they got within range of the loyalists, they turned around and came back. And said, what's going on? And he would charge them again, and they would charge back after him. And so he would do a whole series of charges till he drew the British forces in towards that rudimentary breastworks. And when the loyalist forces got 110 yards away, they fired their muskets. Well, muskets are only accurate from 75 yards. That did absolutely no good whatsoever. And they kept charging. Now they're, loading their muskets, whatever. They got bayonets, but they get within about 50 yards of the Patriot forces, and those guys let loose with their volley, and it just decimates, the charging forces. And they were in disarray, and their commander got wounded in the back of the neck and knocked off his horse. So 200 Patriots with James Williams and 60 men of the Little River Regiment, and help from Shelby and Clark, they defeat the Tories at Musgrove Mill, the 600 Tories at Musgrove Mill. After that, James Williams was leading the 49th, the Little River Regiment at Kings Mountain. They surrounded the Ferguson there, killed 150 of his 900 men, captured 600. At Kings Mountain, James Williams, with his plantation 2 miles over here, he's the last casualty that the Patriots had at Kings Mountain. And many people say that he was shot after the British waved the white flag. So he's like, oh, they surrendered. He's walking around and then he gets shot. He had a controversial death. There's several rumors to his death. I'm not going to get into that. But anyway, when Williams is killed, Joseph Hayes becomes the commander. Colonel Joseph Hayes becomes the commander of the Little River Regiment. And he was at Cowpens. And the Little River Regiment played a crucial part in the victory at Cowpens. Pickens had his militia lined up, 4 regiments, you know, right next to each other. They had skirmishers out front. The British started advancing. The skirmishers shoot at the British officers. When the British line gets too close, the skirmishers come back into the ranks. Well, if you've got 4 regiments lined up shoulder to shoulder, and all of a sudden you got a bunch of skirmishers running through your line, you don't want that. That disrupts your line. So what Joseph Hayes and the Little River Regiment did was they advanced 20 paces. So suddenly now they're out there by their lonesome. They got support on the flanks. The skirmishers come through, and right on the tail of the skirmishers are the British lines. So Pickens gives the order to fire. His regiment on the left, Brandon, they fire and they mow down a bunch of British. Then Hayes fires, boom, he blows down a bunch of British. Then the second on the left fires, that was Roebuck, and he kills a bunch of British. And then Anderson on the right, they fire. By the time that happens, Brandon's loaded again, he fires. And there was a solid line of red coats laying on the ground where the British line met the Andrew Pickens militia with the Little River Regiment playing a crucial role. See, these guys, they're 20 paces ahead. They had the highest rate of casualties of any group, any regiment at Cowpens. Their orders were to fire and retreat. So they did. They followed orders. And they start retreating through, you know, the Continental line, which was behind them. They went around and they regrouped in the back. So, and the British thought, oh, those guys are giving up. So they start charging, and they charge into the Continentals. And, you know, I mean, that was just an absolute massacre. Then the Little River Regiment worked in the mop-up of that whole thing. So they were very active at the last phase of the war, too. But that's quickly, you know, Cowpens. And we're going to see Cowpens next, by the way, in 4 weeks. The 3rd Saturday in October, we're going to go to Cowpens, and you can see what these men did there. So Hayes was instrumental in the victory at Cowpens. There's just nothing, you know. 2 days before Cowpens, there was a group of loyalists coming through to join up with Tarleton men, these loyalists from Georgia, to join up with Tarleton. Well, William Washington, the cavalry leader, George Washington's second cousin, gets word that this militia group from Georgia is marching through. So he says, okay, well, we're going to go attack those. And he picks up the group that knows this area, which is the Little River Militia. So Joseph Hayes and William Washington attacked that group of Georgia militia at Hammond's Store, which is about 10 miles over there. So the story is the militia was camped there eating lunch. They had their rifles stacked. There was a gully and a stream down below. William Washington comes to the top of the hill opposing the gully, sees the loyalist camp there. He charges down the hill and then back up through, and he goes through the ranks of those fellas sitting there eating lunch or whatever, slashing and hacking as he goes. And then when he gets through the camp, he turns around and he comes back through again, slashing and hacking. Joseph Hayes is the infantry support on that. So at Hammond's store, 10 miles away, 2 days before Cowpens, there were 100 Loyalist casualties. There were 0 Patriot casualties. Now I wonder why that is. Was that a massacre? Could have been. There are various reports on that. Joseph Hayes was the commander of the infantry during that assault. And that happened 8 months before this did. So the British are holed up in Charleston. Cunningham's there. He's just seething. He's got a score to settle. He may have known somebody at the Hammond store. He may have been friends or whatever. So he gets sent under orders of the British garrison. He gets sent with 300 men to settle scores before the British were going to leave. And so he comes out with 300 men, and he encounters a group of patriots that are, again, eating, gathered together, whatever, at a place called Clouds Creek. And he surrounds them, and he slaughters those 27 men at Clouds Creek. 2 days later, he's coming through. And he goes to the Williams plantation first. Now, one story I read says that he saw smoke rising from the Williams plantation, so he knew that Bloody Bill was on the loose at that time. And so he gathers his men where they were eating lunch. They eat a lot of lunch back then. They skedaddle up, and they get in this blockhouse that was built during the first Cherokee War. It was 10 feet, about 30 feet, and cedar shingles, that sort of thing. It was a log fort. And the other story that I've heard was that there was somebody at the Williams plantation, Benjamin Goodman, and when he saw Bloody Bill coming, he ran up. He rode his horse over to Joseph Hayes and gives them the warning, and that's when Joseph Hayes comes and sets foot up here. The man who gave that warning was Benjamin Goodman. Benjamin Goodman could have ridden the other way, but he didn't. He came here, he tried to save Hayes's command, and he paid the ultimate price for that. I would like to know something about every single man's name on this marker here. I don't know all of these men, and I hate it for that. I'm kind of on a mission to find out something about all of them. But when Cunningham got here, there was some talk that said, oh, if you surrender now, you'll be saved or whatever. And a shot rang out. One of Cunningham's men was killed, and so Cunningham's just incensed about that. And they load up the ramrods on their muskets, and they wrap them in rags and so forth, and put pitch or something on them, and shoot flaming musket ramrods into the house, or to the blockhouse. And just to make sure that worked just fine, they think there was a blacksmith shop or something around here, and they heated up ingots and threw them onto the roof. But anyway, the place caught on fire. So the inhabitants of the fort there, they surrendered, said, would you treat us as prisoners of war? We'll surrender. Yeah, we'll do that. So they had made them come out one at a time. They tied their hands behind their backs. And then once they had them all with their hands tied behind their backs, they took a big rope and they tied them all together and said, okay, you know, we're going to march you down to Charleston. Well, as soon as that last rope was tied, they said, ha ha, we got you now. We're going to do with you whatever we want. One account states that the hanging started then. Another account says the next morning the hanging started. But there were, by one report, there were either 25 or 35 men originally in Hayes's command. 18 were killed. So what about those other folks? You know, there are records of this occurrence here. I'm not going to call it a battle. And it lists several men who were just captured for one day, or several men who escaped. And the 300 men who were here that had these prisoners, they allowed some of these men to go free. And one of them was Jonathan Downs. I didn't tell you about him. He was the leader of, he was the original colonel of the Little River Regiment. Fought in the ring fight. He was wounded, shot through the hand and through the abdomen. That musket ball stayed in his belly for the rest of his life. But he became inactive in August of 1776. But he was here with the rest of the Little River Regiment 3 or 4 years later, you know, having lunch with him or anything. They let him go. They let Jonathan Downs go, and there's a few others that they let go as well. So they've got the men tied, you know, with their hands behind their back, and say the next morning Cunningham starts to hang them. And there was a fodder pole around here that you used to stack hay with. And he's going to hang Joseph Hayes and Captain Daniel Williams at the same time. Captain Daniel Williams is the son of James Williams, whose plantation is right over there. Captain Williams was 18 years old. So Cunningham was going to hang them both at the same time off a fodder pole. Well, the fodder pole broke. And Bloody Bill got so incensed that that happened that he started hacking away. So one of the stories is that there's another Williams name on this stone, Joseph Williams. Joseph Williams was 14 years old, and he was with his brother, Captain Daniel Williams. And as Daniel Williams is about to be hung, Joseph Williams says, oh brother, what shall I tell our mother?" And Bloody Bill turned to the 14-year-old boy and said, "You'll tell her nothing, you damn rebel suckling." And he stabbed him right through the belly. Hewed him down. So if that story is true, Joseph Williams was the first death here. Another story says, as his brother and Joseph Hayes are about to be hung, Joseph Williams turns to Bloody Bill Cunningham and says, "Captain Cunningham, what shall I tell my mother?" And Cunningham looks at him and says, "I'll save you that onerous task." And he hung him. But I believe that the chopping and the hacking story more, because nope, these men were not hung. They were cut to pieces. There were 18 men killed that day. The families of 4 of those men were able to identify the bodies, and they took them off for private burial. The bodies of the other 14 men, you couldn't tell whose arm belonged to whose head or whose torso. So they were buried in 2 common graves. And as far as I know, we're standing on top of those 2 common graves. There needs to be an archaeological study here. There's no reports of these graves being found and dug up. So I believe that there's 14 men buried right under here. So, you know, the killing went on. John Neal, his father burned down Richard Parris's plantation on the banks of the Reedy River at the end of the Liberty Bridge where the waterfall is in Greenville. His father, Thomas Neal Sr., was a colonel who died in the Battle of Stone Oak. John Neal had two brothers that were twins, and both of them were colonels in the militia. And both of them were killed. John Neal is killed. The entire Neal family, the men in the Neal family were killed. Now there were sisters. But, you know, the sacrifices that were made are incredible. The Williams family, the Neal family, the Irby family. 3 people on here. Joseph Irby Sr., Joseph Irby Jr., Grief Irby. That's 3 men of the same family. Irby was a distinguished family around here. And they left a father, a son, and I'm not sure if that was a brother or a cousin. I don't know Christopher Hardy, Lieutenant Christopher Hardy, Clement Hancock, John Milvin, James Ferris, John Cook, Yancey Saxon. I don't know these men. I want to get to know them. But after Bloody Bill killed here, he went into Spartan County. He made a loop throughout the entire state, and he killed 76 men in his month-long excursion. He was a psychopathic killer. After the war, his cousin Robert Cunningham, who was the militia general for the Loyalist militia, Robert Cunningham went to the Bahamas, where he received a pension from the British government for the rest of his life. Bloody Bill Cunningham went to the Bahamas and lived with his cousin. And he lived there for 6 years till after the war. And then he died under unexplained circumstances. Some say he was poisoned. Some say he died of syphilis. Or whatever. We hope he didn't have a very pleasant end. You know, that's the story of Hayesstation. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions anybody may have.